This is episode number 10 with Kevin Hancock.
So let's go, I'll follow, wherever you go, 'cause you're...
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Invention Show, a podcast about all things invention and reinvention, where entrepreneurs, influencers, leaders, and authorities in the field today share their story of triumphs and challenges in both life and business. My name's Tacklee, entrepreneur, international property investor, inventor, and the host of this show. Now, today, I've got a very special guest with a compelling story to match. Kevin Hancock, a sixth-generation family CEO of Hancock Lumber, one of the oldest companies in America, which dates back to 1848. Now, after being diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that made speaking a bit difficult, Kevin had to basically reinvent leadership and has since gone on to lead his company to greater heights. An extraordinary leader who's also an award-winning author and speaker. Simply inspirational and transformational. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Kevin, and thanks for being with us.
Tack, hello, it's my pleasure. I'm very happy to be with you.
Likewise. Now, the first thing I'd like to ask on my guest, Kevin, and for those who are not familiar with yourself, is can you please give us a window into your background, who you are, and what was your first job?
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty small town in the state of Maine in New England, about a couple hours north of Boston. And my first job, to jump to that right after college, was I actually taught and coached at a private school. I taught American history, I taught Russian and Soviet history, and I coached basketball.
Wow, that's a great first job.
It was great fun.
Now, I just want to talk about your latest book to start off with, Kevin. You know, The Seventh Power, one CEO's journey into the business of shared leadership. I believe it was released earlier this year to fantastic reviews, and in some way, ties back to your first book, Not for Sale, Finding Center in the Land of Crazy Horse, which won numerous awards. Can you please give our listeners an idea of what your book, this book, The Seventh Power, is about? What is the seventh power, and why do you think your books have been so successful?
Sure, thank you. The seventh power is a Sioux Indian concept. So the Sioux tribes are from the northern plains here in the States, and I have spent a lot of time on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, which is one of the Sioux reservations. And the seventh power stands for the individual human spirit. So it's represented in their sacred medicine wheel, which honors the powers of the West, North, East, South, sky, and earth, those external powers that surround us. But at the center of that medicine wheel is the seventh power, which is you. It's me. So the idea of focusing on the seventh power is really all about tapping into the individual human spirit and recognizing that every individual is sacred and holy and powerful in his or her own right. And my book is really about getting away from a structure that focuses on the empire, the organization, the nation state, the corporation, and having those entities turn around and focus on their individual members. So the idea within a company would be to help the company thrive by focusing on helping the individuals thrive, and then the company ends up being successful almost by default as the outcome of a higher calling or mission or purpose.
Yeah, no, I've read it and I love it. So it's another 5 stars from me, Kevin. Now,
thank you.
You're welcome. Now, after your, diagnosis of SD, your journey of reinvention is simply fascinating. Can you please share your backstory on that journey? I mean, what is spasmodic dysphonia and your healing process? Because, I don't think it's something that's very common.
It's not. So about a decade ago in 2010, at the peak of the housing and mortgage market collapse here in America, I began to have trouble speaking, something I'd never thought about, always done a lot of and taken for granted as a CEO. And it turned out I'd acquired a rare neurological disorder called spasmodic dysphonia that affects only speech with no known cause and no known cure. And as you suggest, it's very, very rare. And what happens when I go to talk is the muscles in my throat, they kind of overfire, and it kind of feels like someone might maybe put a seat belt around your neck and squeezed it when you try to talk, so you run out of air. But I do want to say I'm completely fine. This does not bother me, and I enjoy telling this story. I've gotten quite a bit better over the years. But so the big challenge there was I found myself trying to help lead our company through a difficult time without really being able to use my voice. And I had to think very differently about how I was going to lead. And initially, just to give you a quick story, to protect my voice, the biggest strategy I started using was to answer a question with a question, thereby putting the conversation back on the other person. So someone would come up to me at work with a question or a problem, and I started saying simply, "That is a good question. What do you think we should do about it?" And while initially this was just a voice protecting exercise, what struck me over time, after having done this for months and months, hundreds of times, was that people already knew what to do. It turned out they already had great solutions to the problems and challenges they saw, and they didn't actually need a top-down, bureaucratic, CEO-centric directive to fix the problems they saw. All they really needed was some encouragement to trust their own voice and their own judgment and a safe culture to work in. And that's what got me really interested in this idea of shared leadership and dispersing power, and maybe using the liabilities of my voice to turn it into a positive that could strengthen the voices of others. I was suddenly like, well, what if everybody helped lead this company? And what if everybody was the spokesperson for this company? Wouldn't that create a much more dynamic and agile and meaningful organization than the traditional model anyway? So all of that got me there unexpectedly. It was a bit of a liability that ended up turning into what I came to see as an opportunity or an invitation.
Oh, yeah. No, that's awesome. That's some story, Kevin. Now, just taking you back to your initial diagnosis, what was actually going through your mind? Your initial reaction when the doctors told you, "Sorry, Kevin, this condition is incurable."
Yeah, it really at first scared me. I'd say honestly, like I didn't know, or I wondered initially if it would prevent me from being able to continue to do my job. But what really happened was it changed the way I did my job for the better. And once I saw the invitation to lead differently, I really started to relax about it, and then ultimately to get excited about it. So I went from being scared and confused and not knowing what to do to actually being thankful that it happened to me.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Now, as president and CEO, I mean, you lead a company with over 500, employees, and that's a feat in itself. Now, apart from like, asking a question with a question at the initial stages, did you have to use any or develop any other strategies to counter this basically loss of voice that you had?
Yeah, I would say really two strategies in theory. One was um, thinking about leadership as being about listening more than talking,
Yeah.
flipping that script. And the other strategy I've come to talk about is restraint. So when you're the CEO, you can do everything. You can take on all the decision-making work if you want it. And for me, this process was about learning to not make decisions and being at peace with sharing responsibility really broadly. So what I had to actually learn, which was harder than it sounds, was how to do less so that others and the whole organization could actually do more. And the outcome of that is really obvious. 550 people leading can cover a lot more ground than I ever could have covered trying to do it kind of the traditional way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome. Now, in business, Kevin, do you believe, customers or clients always come first and they're always right? Or is it something that customers say?
Yeah, so I've really changed my thinking about this over the years. I used to believe in that old saying that the customer comes first, but I now don't quite think that's right. I think the people who are going to take care of the customer come first. So the employees. So we've really tried to adopt a employee-centric approach to our company. Our first priority is to create a great experience, work experience for the people of our company, in the belief that if we create a great experience for them, they will create a world-class experience for the customer. So to borrow a piece of Maine slang, what I like to say now is that the customer comes a wicked close second. So wicked in New England means actually good or important. So the customer is super important. We're really into our customers, but they don't come first. They come a very close second. The people who work here come first. That's our first focus.
Oh, powerful. Now, out of curiosity, what was Kevin Hancock like pre-SD?
Yeah, I was a pretty typical traditional CEO. I was going to every meeting, presiding over every meeting, leading every meeting. I was the voice and the face and the facilitator of the organization. So if you'd seen me then, you wouldn't have thought anything was wrong per se. It would have just looked very traditional. That's when I grew up. That's what I saw business leaders do, and that's what I was doing. And it really took my voice disorder to bump me out of that orbit. I think without the voice condition, I wouldn't have gained the awareness to see a very different set of possibilities with respect to what leaders do.
Mm-hmm. Wow, awesome. Now I want to bring up spirituality briefly, Kevin. In your book, you touched on it. And for me, it's something I personally have been learning and reading more about in the last probably 24 months or so. Some people think it's, it's woo-woo, and that's okay. I mean, what are your views and thoughts on it in helping, and leading to success in both life and business?
Sure, great question. Again, going back to the time I've spent on the Pine Ridge Reservation with the people there, I have become really interested in indigenous spirituality. And typically in indigenous spirituality, what you'll see in different language and forms is the concept that everything is related and connected. So the Sioux say "mitakie oi asan," which means we're all brothers, all things are one thing, or to say it differently, everything that exists connects to, it comes from the same sacred energy source. And by that definition, therefore, every being is sacred and valuable and unique and powerful in his or her own right. So this really tied back into me to the idea of helping everyone find and release their own true voice. That kind of was the connecting theme for me. And I got thinking a lot about, well, what is the very purpose of a human life on earth? That unanswerable question. But I think it's important because a company or any organization should be advancing that, the human experience, not hindering it. And I've really come to believe that perhaps the human experience is about self-actualization, coming into your own true voice. So for me, spirituality is actually about learning to look inward, to live with your heart, not just your head, and to recognize that you are sacred and that your voice is a never to be repeated manifestation of the universe, and to learn to love and release your own true voice. That's really what spirituality means for me.
Yeah. No, fascinating. Now, for a company such as Hancock Lumber, which has been in operation for over 170 years now, I mean, this is another feat in itself. What do you think has been Hancock Lumber's, secret sauce to staying in the game and being relevant, especially through your leadership? What do you think has made Hancock Lumber successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I always say is, to be a really old company, you have to have started a really long time ago. So we've got that luck on our side. But to the real spirit of your question, I think it's a combination of things. I think it does take some luck that you capitalize on. I think it takes persistence, because there's no way anything is going to be smooth and easy over a long period of time. I think it takes a culture that really values people, because it takes a lot of people, from customers to employees to community members, to allow a company to endure. But then I also think an organization's got to have a mission that is worth enduring. It's got to be something more than just making lumber, which is what we do, or making money, which is what all corporations do. The mission's got to be bigger than that. But then ultimately, too, I think every generation has to be entrepreneurial. I think there's a myth that only the founding generation was entrepreneurial, but really the world changes so much every generation that unless an organization is constantly reinventing itself, it's eventually gonna drift out of, as you say, relevancy.
Yeah, no, that's gold. That's gold. So in your view, Kevin, what are the signs of a true influential leader? And on the side, what do you see as the most common downfall for a leader?
Yeah, what comes to mind to me here first is authenticity,
Ah, yes. Yep.
and then humility,
Mm-hmm.
and finally something more than ego. And that for me is really being in it for something more than just your own personal benefit. But I think people really respond to authenticity. They know it when they see it, and they know it when it's absent. And I think all great leaders lead a little bit differently because they're going to lead in their unique, authentic way, which gets back to spirituality, in my view, and really knowing yourself first in order to be an effective or valuable leader.
Okay. Now, when did your moment of leadership clarity, that you're searching for arrive? Was it back when you, first visited Pine Ridge?
Yeah, I would say it started with my voice condition, and then it built a bit when I was at Pine Ridge, and it really, too, I think has been a journey of failure, recovery, learning, growth. I think that success is never linear, or not linear for very long. And so I really think, I love the way you phrase the question. I think while there are some defining moments, I think really it's the collection of moments that creates the story for all of us.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, can you please share with our listeners, Kevin, what do you think has been your biggest area of improvement? And do you have any regrets?
Yeah, I'd say my biggest area of improvement has been learning to look inward first and to work on myself. When I was a younger leader, I really thought leadership was all about paying attention to what other people are doing. And I've since come to believe that leadership is really about, as Gandhi said, becoming the change that you wish to see in the world. And I now, well, I like to think of it this way: getting myself right is pretty close to a full-time job. And my big responsibility is to try to be what I'd like to see. And I found that if I focus on being what I'd like to see, that ripples out into the world around me. And that was a really liberating realization. Took a lot of pressure off. The only person any of us can really, really influence is ourselves. And when we influence ourselves, we then position ourselves to influence others indirectly.
So if you could turn back time, and talk to your 18-year-old self, or a little bit younger, what would you tell them?
This question actually tears me up a little bit when I think about it. It's a brilliant question. I would tell myself, it's okay. It's all gonna be okay.
Yeah, I think that's something that, especially in these interesting times, we all need to tell ourselves. So now going to turning points again, Kevin. All points. When you look back at your entire life, everything that you have, your journey to date, there are a couple of pinpoints that you've already mentioned with your voice and the visits to Pine Ridge. But are there any other points that you can go, yes, those are the points that basically changed everything for you? Or are there such a points?
There was one other big point, and it really links back to spirituality. I had an evolutionary astrology reading done for me back in about 2007. And evolutionary astrology, long story short, is kind of three tenets. They are, first, that everything that exists is interconnected, back to that indigenous idea, and that sacred energy that exists in everything has a mission, and that mission is that it wants to evolve. It wants to learn, it wants to grow, and it wants to evolve. And finally, as to humans, evolutionary astrology suggests that humans have multiple incarnations, multiple lifetimes, and that the soul, the spirit is the being, and that spirit incarnates to learn certain lessons. Whether or not that's true is unknowable in a single lifetime, but I found it really fascinating even to pretend it's true. Like to say to myself, what's brought me here, and what am I trying to learn? In what ways am I trying to grow? What types of habits and characteristics would I like to shed or soften, and which would I like to strengthen? All of that has brought me back to being really intentional with living, and to try to be able to look at the things that are happening to me and find meaning in them, meaning for me, and opportunity for me to change and grow.
Awesome. Now, Kevin, you mentioned early on just now, you had to really step back a little bit when, your disorder sort of was first diagnosed. I mean, what words of advice do you have for people, that are caught up in too much, so-called busy? Now, you hear a lot of people say that there's never enough time. What do you think is behind that, and the notion that everyone needs to be busy all the time? What's your views there?
Yeah, I love this question. It's really that whole idea of making sure that we don't confuse being busy with being successful, or being busy with living. And I talk a lot about this, and I wrote about it extensively in my book that you mentioned. I've kind of coined this concept, the idea of putting the work back in its place, where it's important. We're really into it, but it's not going to be all consuming. As productivity improves, as efficiency improves, work should take less time, not more. But we've got to just change our orientation about what it is that we're after. So in our company, we've been able to grow and grow while shortening the work week and increasing people's pay or compensation. But it takes a different focus to do that. That old model was, the earlier I get up, the longer I work, the later I stay, the more valuable I am to my company. And we've got to blow past that strategy, because it doesn't work. There's always more work you could do.
Yeah. No, definitely. Remember that one, listeners. Now, what makes Kevin Hancock feel inspired or like your best self?
I would say it's anything that strikes me as authentic, when I feel like I'm following my own voice and speaking my own truth. That makes me light up. And conversely, when I get a bunch of time caught up in activity that that's not serving that. That's what kind of makes me anxious or fidgety or uncomfortable. So I try to can be such a consuming and distracting world out there.
Yeah.
And I've tried to really focus on what's right in front of me. I found that the world in real life is a lot more manageable than the world on a screen. The world on a screen looks completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if I take a deep breath and just look at what's in front of me, suddenly it seems manageable, and suddenly I have the opportunity to be much more in control of my agenda and to stay on my mission. That's really the challenge, is in a chaotic world, how do we all stay on our own missions?
Okay. So would you say that is your definition of success? I mean, everyone has their own definition of success. What is your like, how do you define it?
Yeah, I would say that is my definition of success, is to be on my path and to stay on my path. And when I do get knocked off my path, to recognize it sooner rather than later, and to take a deep breath and get back on my path.
Awesome. Now, in interesting times like this, what is your advice, for our listeners, Kevin? I mean, we have an audience from over 90 countries. Some places are starting to open up. Some are back into lockdown, like we're here. And in general, people are still at home and there's a lot of free time. Besides reading your book, Kevin, what should people, leaders, or those who inspire to be leaders, be doing right now? So, when everything does settle down, they can come out firing.
Well, I think this is a chance to reset. So we're all either back out, about to come back out, or contemplating coming back out. One way or another, we're all eventually, quote unquote, coming back out. And so quiet time, it's almost like a halftime in a sporting event. It's a chance to stop and think about how we want to come back out. And let's say the first half didn't go great, or even if it did, the second half is always an opportunity to adjust. So I think that there's the gift of time to sit, think, reflect, and reorganize and come back out the way we want to come out.
Wow. Powerful. So what's exciting for Kevin Hancock at the moment? I mean, what are you doing to position yourself for what's to come?
I've become really interested in reinventing capitalism, really thinking differently about the mission, purpose, and potential of a business. I think we all around the planet know that humanity's got to make some pretty big changes, but I'm still a big believer in freedom, individual human freedom. And with individual human freedom really comes the private sector and capitalism with it. But capitalism's got to think about itself differently, and it's got to really think more broadly about who its stakeholders are. And the simplest way I've come to think about that is, I think in the 21st century, winning is not winning unless everybody's winning.
Yes, agreed. Totally.
And I think that business can adopt that approach in a way that will actually improve business performance, but more importantly, make business a real, healthy, valuable social enterprise.
Awesome. So what is your legacy, Kevin? What do you want to be known for?
I would hope that people would remember me as someone who strengthened the voices of others, who helped other people come into their own true voice.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think your voice is your gift? I mean, what has happened?
I do. No doctor will ever concur with this, but I'm convinced it was a gift from my own soul or spirit guides. It was a shot across my bow, tactically inserted in just the right place to give me every opportunity to make the change of course I needed to make.
That's interesting. Now, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
The billboard would say, what if everybody on earth felt trusted, respected, valued, and heard? What might change? I think that is the one question that could change everything on this planet. So the billboard would just pose the question.
That's great. That's a good one. So as a lead up to that, Kevin, what superpower do you wish you had and why?
I love this question too, and my answer is I'm glad I don't have any, because I think the real superhuman opportunity of a life on Earth is to live it as a human, as an ordinary, vulnerable human, and a superpower in any capacity. As tempting as it might be, like I'd love to fly, but as tempting as it might be, I think it would limit the full potential of the human experience. That our superpower is that we're human.
Wow, that's great. I've never thought about it that way, Kevin. So no, thanks for that. Now, just it's simply amazing. Unfortunately, we have to work towards wrapping up, and super mindful of your time. Phenomenal story, shares and words of wisdom. Really appreciate your transparency and authenticity. Just two last questions. First is, where can people find out more about yourself and your book?
Thank you. Yes, you can reach me directly on my website, which is KevinDHancock.com, KevinDHancock.com, and you can email me within that site, and I always follow up with anybody that reaches out to me. And you can also access the books, both of my books, on that site, or Amazon or any online book retailer will also have them.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. I'll put some links below. And secondly, and lastly, what parting words of wisdom would you like to impart for our listeners?
I'm going to go back to the advice I gave my 18-year-old self a few minutes ago. It's all going to be okay.
Awesome. Totally incredible insights, learnings and knowledge. Thanks again, Kevin, and really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Tack. I've loved being on your show. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Likewise. Welcome. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. You can find me at turn-x.com and also on social media at iam.tacklee. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, please do make sure you subscribe and take a minute to leave us a review. Thank you.
YOLO, it's our show. There's one thing we know with all our cargo. It's turn X, our hero.